a todos, mi nombre es Carmen Trujillo, la creadora de la Semana Virtual del Perdón. Hoy es nuestro primer día juntos y espero que disfruten todas estas ponencias. La primera es en inglés y les quiero explicar el por qué. El doctor Michael Ryce es un pionero en el trabajo del perdón. Tiene muchísimos años trabajando y vamos a empezar a hablar desde lo que significa el perdón desde sus inicios, desde el siglo I, y de ahí seguir explicando. Lo otro bien importante, por qué lo quería presentar a él, es porque la palabra construye y destruye. Y si no sabemos el significado de las palabras, como es en el caso del perdón, no podemos beneficiarnos de el experimentar lo que significa realmente el perdón. Entonces por eso lo invité, para que abriera esta cumbre, y siento que estamos abriendo con broche de oro, así que no se lo pierdan. Les voy a decir su biografía y luego tienen la entrevista subtitulada en español. ¿Ok? El doctor Michael Ryce es el fundador y director de Heartland, un centro de autocuración en las montañas de Ozark. Es conferencista y profesor de renombre mundial sobre salud y curación, con doctorados en medicina naturopática, filosofía holística. El enfoque de sus estudios ha combinado los principios cuerpo-mente, la física y los antiguos estudios arameos en un cuerpo único de trabajo, pionero en los campos de autocuración, la curación a través de las relaciones, la resolución de la ira y el dolor, la paz mundial y el proceso interno del perdón. Su libro ¿Por qué me pasa esto otra vez? Es un bestseller que ha sido traducido a 10 idiomas y puede descargarse gratis en su página web. En particular, él presenta una hoja de trabajo práctica de 12 pasos sobre cómo, desde el Arameo antiguo, el proceso interno del perdón, la cual ha sido fuente de inspiración para varios autores, entre ellos Colin Tipping, de quien hablaremos múltiples ocasiones en esta cumbre. Su propósito de vida, como él dice, es confrontar a las personas para aprender a enseñar el perdón verdadero a gran escala. Así que disfruten de su entrevista, así como yo la disfruté, y espero que sigan toda la semana del perdón. Gracias. Thank you, Dr. Michael, for accepting my invitation to this week of forgiveness. It's my honor and pleasure to interview you, and I hope everybody take a lot of information from you. So
delighted, honored to be here.
Thank you. So the first thing that I want to know is, how do you get into this work? Because I see your studies, you study electronic, business, theology, and then you have a doctorate in naturopathic medicine and holistic philosophy. So how everything came together?
Well, the story starts actually about 6 days, goes a long way back before that, but specifically that got me into doing this work was about 6 days before I was born. My mother had toxemia, and they gave her Pitocin, trying to get me out. Mm-hmm. And when I finally, I guess, decided to come out, they called my father at work and said, if you want to see this kid alive, you better get down here because he's not going to make it through the night. That was my starting point. Through my childhood, I lived on an inhalator and pills. I never went to school. The first 2 weeks of school every year, I was always at a hospital in an oxygen tent. And for 25 years, lived on an inhalator, didn't go anywhere without breathing support for lung problems and asthma. Every kind of miracle drug they gave me, and it got to the point where I realized that while this was keeping me alive, it was killing me, and I had to do something. So that became my search. That was the motivation for my search. And when I started to look at health and I began to study naturopathy, everything that I had learned in the world of physics, which was my side study out of the world of electronics, everything that I'd learned all of a sudden became, oh, this is about physics. Health is about how this energy system works. And one of my favorite quotes comes out of Einstein's mouth, and he says that we've been fooled that matter actually does not exist. He says it this way: on such things as matter, we've been all wrong. What we have heretofore called matter is energy, energy whose vibrations have been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter. We don't live in a material world. We don't live in a physical world. We live in a world of energy. So I took that into my study of medicine, and then I came across the first century Aramaic teachings of a man named Yeshua. They call him Jesus. His name was not Jesus. His name was Yeshua. And what I realized with the brain cells that I had from the work that I'd done, when I listened to him, I realized he was not a theological figure. He wasn't teaching theology. He was teaching physics. He was teaching psychology. He was teaching psychiatry. He was teaching genetics. He was teaching physiology. Here's how the energy system works. And it's interesting, you know, you won't find any one of the world's major religions coming out of the Greek language or the Arabic language or the Spanish language or the German language or French, none of them. At least 5 of the world's major religions come out of the Aramaic language.
Okay.
And it's a language of energy. It's interesting. The letters of the Aramaic alphabet are actually 3D shadows of the atomic structure of the elements. The language is based in the physics of the world. Our languages are based in our heads. They were called babble. You know, we're babbling right now. You know, you have some brain cells for certain words, and I have some brain cells, and where they match, we go, oh, yeah, I understand what you're saying. And where you have different brain cells, you go, what are you talking about, Michael? I don't know what that means. Or I have different brain cells from you, and you tell me so. I go, I don't have a clue what you're talking about because I have a different set of brain cells. What Yeshua said in his work was, in order to do his work, you had to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Now, I think we can fairly safely assume that most everybody in his audience had what we call physical eyes and ears. It wasn't about that. What he was saying is you have to have the brain cells. You have to have the content in your mind in order to understand what he said about what he was teaching. And what we have in our Western world is such a heavy Greek influence that much of it has been turned exactly backward. So when you realize that it's been turned around, you know, our primary topic is forgiveness. And in the Greek language, here's how forgiveness comes across. You did something really terrible that caused all this pain inside of me, but it's okay, I'll forgive you. Now, I'll have people that I tell I'm going to do my Why Is This Happening to Me Again workshop, and they're welcome to come and do it. And they say, and what's it about? And I say, forgiveness. They say, oh, I don't need to do that. I've already forgiven everybody. My mother, my father, my sister, my brother, my former spouse, my present spouse. I've even forgiven my future spouses. Well, when somebody's languaging like that, what I know is they have done absolutely zero forgiveness work to date. None. Lots of pardoning, lots of letting people off the hook for what's going on inside of them, but it's still going on inside of them because they have not learned what forgiveness means. In Aramaic, in Yeshua's teaching, the word forgive was how you go inside yourself and remove the root of your rage and your fear and your sadness and your grief and your hatred and your pain and your trauma so that you stand truly as a human being. The Greeks can't even talk about that. So that was my starting point and where it comes to for me now.
I hear you saying at one point that forgiveness means to cut, to change perception of the situation and that really resonates. Like, I studied forgiveness before with Colin Tippin and everything, but I guess that day was like, oh, I got it in another level. It's not that right. Before I didn't understand it, but that was like, okay, I got it now.
Yes. Yeah, and when you realize that forgiveness it has nothing to do with the world. You know, some people work with the Course in Miracles and they say, well, there's nothing to forgive. And they think, oh, well, that makes everything okay. No, it doesn't make everything okay. To pardon is to let another off the hook. And I understand in Spanish, the word that they've translated forgive is pardon. Mm-hmm. And letting other people off the hook doesn't change the content of what's in here. In the first century Aramaic, Yeshua taught, and this is the key to health, this is the key to aliveness, the key to life. He taught how to go inside and remove what never belonged. So forgiveness, instead of letting somebody off the hook, is about removal. accessing and removing what never belonged. And he had a specific step-by-step technology. Here's how you go inside yourself.
Before we go to the steps, I want you to tell us how this changed, how that meaning changed in the culture. And I know that you talk about that because when I hear that one, that was the origin of this. That was the seed for this virtual event.
When someone who doesn't have the brain cells, again, Yeshua says, you've got to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. I'd offer he wasn't talking about, I think we can safely assume that most everybody had what we call physical eyes and ears. So he wasn't talking about that. He was saying you have to have the brain cells. The brain cells that the Aramaic language represents are so different than the Greek that, and we've all heard the statement, lost in translation. I'm sure, as I have, you've had someone who, maybe when you were being a Spanish speaker, when you were learning English, you turned to another Spanish-speaking friend and you said, well, how do you say that in English? And they said, you can't say that. There aren't brain cells. There aren't words for it. So you've got to have the brain cells for what he was talking about to understand what he understood. And what he understood about forgiveness was it is a tool of removal, not a tool of pardoning. Does that make sense?
Yes, that part, yes. But there is something else that I want you to tell me.
Okay.
How about changing, when you change the meaning of the word, what happened in a culture? And who said that?
Well, if I bring a child up and tell them that every time they're in pain or upset or disturbance, I tell them that all they have to do is let the person out there off the hook for what's going on inside of them, they will never change what's going on inside of them. And the Greek culture was well established in projection. You made me mad, you made me sad, you made me afraid. So when forgiveness came along, it changed from being all about inside of me and changing what's inside of me to being all about getting rid of the people who are the problem in our lives or letting them off the hook. So there was a change because of a shift in brain cells. There was not an understanding that the problem is an internal problem. And so that shift in language occurred. And I can certainly, when you get down to the technology that Yeshua taught as forgiveness, I can certainly understand why people didn't get that it was about how to collapse their pained perception and drop into the root of the pain and remove it, because the Greek culture had no concept of such a thing. So the original meaning of the word forgive was lost. So when you change the meaning of words, Yeshua's words in Aramaic had a certain meaning. Forgive, meaning go inside yourself, remove the root of your pain. When you go to the Greek culture says forgive is letting other people off the hook because there's pain in you. It's interesting, Vladimir Lenin, who's probably responsible for more deaths than anybody in all of history, said that the way to destroy a culture was to change the meaning of its words. And we'll see that virtually every important word that Yeshua taught, its meaning has been changed. Forgiveness has become pardoning. Love has become something to do with sexual athletics, when love is the essence of our true nature. It's who we are. So when you change the meaning of the words, because our enculturation, because our cultures are brought into us as children through words, if we don't have accurate meaning for the words, we can't replicate a culture. We can't carry on a culture if the word meanings are changing.
I want to say that this is the reason why I'm doing this, because it's very hard to get out and tell people about my work, forgiveness, because it's not popular. And some people changing, and some people talk about gratitude and other words and you go there and it's great. However, for me, when I hear that, I said, I'm not gonna change the name of what I do.
Right.
I want to teach what it means.
Yes.
And that's why you opening this.
And that's why this is the basic, the origin of this week of forgiveness. And it's going to be, that's my work.
I'm with you 200%, and you've got my support fully.
Thank you.
In Yeshua's Aramaic language, forgive is the way that you collapse what's going on in your head, your perceptual constructs, and drop into the place where the hidden pain resides. You get to access that pain and bring it forward in the presence of love and remove it. The Greeks just had no idea. It was totally lost. And I'll tell you that, and when we get to the core of the forgiveness process and I explain it, it took me 35 years of working with the Aramaic to understand how and why that worked. I mean, I taught the core tool for 35 years out of the first century Aramaic teachings of Yeshua. And I didn't know why or how it worked. And so I understand the Greeks had no brain cells for it and couldn't present it as it was originally meant. And personally, it took me about 35 years of working with that first century Aramaic tool and literally working with thousands of people to go and to integrate the psychology, the psychiatry, the theology, the physics, the physiology, to get to understand why and how it worked. Now, in 2 minutes flat, I can explain why and how it works. For 35 years, I couldn't do that. It was just lost. We didn't have the brain cells for it. And it took working repeatedly with those first century Aramaic words of Yeshua. And it's interesting, the only other place the core of forgiveness I've found on the planet is in the Course in Miracles, content of the mind.
It's an individual process, right? Because reality is inside of us, of each,
Well, there's some interesting Harvard research that says that in a time frame where there are 10,000 brain cells firing, there are literally 10,000 measurable units of electrical activity happening in the brain. The max amount of data that goes into building our perception is a little tiny framework, 9 bits. 9 bits out of 10,000, that's all we're seeing. And it's been estimated in that same time frame that there are approximately 20 trillion bits of data happening in the actual world in that same time frame. So our mind narrows it down till we look at this little tiny picture in our minds and we think the picture's true about something out there. But the truth is, the picture's only true about what's happening in here. And if what's happening in here contains pain, trauma, fear, rage, sadness, grief, hatred, vengeance, then I need to reach in here to make a change. Trying to let other people off the hook out there for it changes nothing. Well, actually, it does change something. Let me correct that. Because if I have, let's say, hatred resonated by a particular person, if I get into the pardoning act, if I let them off the hook, I can break the connection in my mind with them to that hatred. And so I look at them and I don't feel hatred anymore. But I've still got the hatred in there until I go in and forgive that hatred. So pardoning, there's a benefit to it. It's a nice thing to do, but it isn't forgiveness. And anytime somebody's talking about, well, just, forgive them, forgive yourself, they're talking about pardoning work. And once we pardon, nice thing to do, it can break that connection. But now I need to take the next step and go inside myself. And if I have hatred, I need to access directly that energy of hatred. And I need to bring it forward in the presence of love to dissolve it and remove it. Because the forgiveness is about the removal.
Now that you mentioned about love, tell us what unconditional love is.
Well, if I say, don't think about the color of your car, what happens?
I think about the color of my car.
Your mind goes to the color. If I say unconditional love, what happens? The mind goes to conditions.
Okay.
It's a resonance machine. It doesn't have any choice. Where we want to go is to all embracing love, all encompassing love. And, people will ask me to define love. It's like, there aren't enough words in the Spanish language, the English, or the Greek, or any other language to tell us what love is. But we have an experiential definition we've developed in this work. Do you have any children?
Yes.
Okay. If you go back to the first time you held that newborn baby, first child, and you tap into the essence of that child, what word would you use to describe the essence of that child?
You made me cry.
Good. Let's go for it. Let's breathe into that. Awesome.
That's what it is, and that's what is this work.
So notice the essence of the child, and this is a question that my wife Jeannie and I have asked of tens of thousands of people all over the globe. Go back and hold the newborn. And everybody's word when we say describe the newborn is some variation on the theme of love. Mm-hmm. In fact, we've got it over here on the board. A whole list. Awesome, sweet, pure, wonderful, miracle, precious, present, gift, love, blessing. So we can come up with an experiential definition of love. It's what we are. Now, go back once again and think about holding that newborn, and then ask yourself the question, is the newborn loving you, or is the newborn love?
It's love.
Clearly, the newborn is love. But notice we came into the world, and most people had the love beat out of them, and then they were sent out with a false definition for love, just like the false definition of forgiveness changed the words of a culture, you destroyed the culture, and they were told, go find somebody to love you. Go love somebody. And now, and I don't know if it was popular in the Spanish world, but a few decades ago, there was a very popular song in the English world, and the key line was, looking for love in all the wrong places, looking for love in too many faces. You can't get it from somebody else. You can't give it to someone else. You can only be it. And you can't be it if rage and fear and hatred and vengeance are moving in you. When you remove, when you forgive the hate, the fear, the rage, the vengeance, the grief, then there's a space for active love to show up in the world. It's called incarnation. And so we're looking to change the definition of many, many, many words. I actually do a 2-hour video called Arameisms. And Arameisms is a term that I coined to represent our work, working to establish or reestablish the original first century meanings of the Aramaic words. And I spend 4 hours with an Aramaic scholar called Dale Allen Hoffman, where we talk about the original Aramaic words and what those words meant, working to reestablish that original culture, because it's been destroyed by the changing of the meaning of those words.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now we can go into the process. Go ahead. Just tell me the process.
Tell you the process. Well, we live in a world of actuality. So something happens in the world that the Creator created, and that triggers certain brain cells in us. When those brain cells are triggered, 9 bits of data, as that research I spoke about earlier, fire and create a construct in our minds. Now, we've been taught a lie. We've been taught that we have a set of windows. We look out of these windows into the world and we see what's happening out there. That's a total fraud and a total lie. This is not a window. You can't see out of it. It's actually an antenna. It's a frequency receiver for light. And when light comes into the eye, it carries information. And the information that it carries into the eye causes brain cells to resonate. And my mind produces a construct called perception. It's made of a max of 9 bits of data out of 10,000 brain cells firing in what is perhaps a 20 trillion bit world. So when I create a perception, I'm creating a picture of what I think is happening out there, but it's really a reflection of the content of my own mind. And especially when there's hostility and fear involved, people live in total hallucinations. Let's document the hallucination. Has anybody ever accused you of saying something you never, absolutely never said, or doing something that you've never done? Anybody ever accuse you of that?
Yeah, probably, yes.
So here's what happened. An event occurred. You did something. Your behavior triggered brain cells in them. Their brain cells projected that reality, and they saw you do what they said you did. They actually had a picture in their mind of you doing it, even though it never happened. Because when you fired those brain cells in them, that created a construct called their reality. Now notice, and we could ask this of everyone in our audience, notice the state of mind of the person who accused you of saying something you never said and doing something you absolutely never did. Were they over here on this side of the board in love? Or were they over here on this side of the board in some form of hostility or fear? 100% of the time, when hostility or fear is active in the mind, the perceptions created by that mind are based in corrupt data and are telling us a lie. So when our mind is lying to us, when our mind is projecting hostility or fear into my brain's image of another, when I'm living in that picture world and I think it's true out there, I'm in trouble. And so what Yeshua presented was a tool called forgiveness. If you lose the presence of active love, which is literally your human life, you want to be restored to human life. You are restored to human life through forgiveness. And so if the mind is projecting its hostility or fear and generating a reality and laying it over top of the actuality, what we need is a tool to collapse the reality. And when I collapse the reality, it collapses in on itself. And when it collapses in on itself, it gives me access to what's underneath it. The original pain, the original trauma. It might be generations old, the energy that produces that pained perception. So what forgiveness does is it collapses projected pain in the mind. It literally changes the world we see. Again, the eye is just an antenna. You can't see out through it. You know, a TV antenna brings a signal into a television set. Can the television set look back up the wires and look out the antenna? No. Can we look back through the antenna and look out there? No. The world we see is generated by the activity of the firing of the brain cells that we hold within us. If the world we see contains some form of fear, hostility, or pain, it's because we contain fear, hostility, or pain. And when I apply forgiveness, I get to remove the fear, the hostility, and the pain, and I make a space for love to show up, my true essence to show up. There's an interesting line can be translated out of the what people call the Lord's Prayer. It's not a prayer at all, but there's a line that can be translated that says to the Creator, carve out a space in me for your wholeness. We want the wholeness of love to show up in physiology, and we need to carve that space out. What forgiveness does is it opens and carves out that space so that active present love shows up in our physiology, and we are fueled by that active present love rather than fueled by unresolved hostility and fear. So that's what forgiveness does. Now, you'll notice, and I'll just ask everyone in your audience to think about it, you know, and unless you're just a totally miserable person, you'll notice that you're pretty much generally happy with most everybody in your life, as long as they're doing what you want them to do.
Right.
You'll notice that when you point hostility or fear at them is when they're doing something different than your goal for them.
Your expectation, yeah.
Well, actually, expectation's a little different. A goal is something I'm committed to, and expectation is something I'd like. We really want to look at the power of a goal. You know, I wanted Charlie to love me, and Charlie raged at me. And the minute before Charlie started raging, I could embrace Charlie and sweetness and everything was wonderful. But the minute he violated my goal for him to love me or to cherish me, that goal caused my mind to use some form of unresolved hostility or fear in me. And all of a sudden, I pointed rage at Charlie. Whose rage did I point at Charlie? My rage. It's about me. And so, you know, when you realize this piece of research, it's a really important key to the whole puzzle. 10,000 brain cells are firing, 9 bits of data go into perception. What is it that determines which 9 bits of data are going to produce my reality? It is the goal that I hold. The goal acts like a driver that selects data out of that 10,000 brain cells. I've got sweetness, I've got beauty, I've got peace, and I've maybe got rage and fear and grief. If my goal resonates my rage and fear and grief, then I'm going to be all of a sudden pointing a 9-bit corrupt data mind of hostility toward Charlie. In the Aramaic language, the word forgive is shabag or shabak, and it means to cancel. What is it when I'm in the heat of battle, when I'm in all this upset and fear, rage, sadness, whatever it happens to be, what is it that I can cancel in order to change that? Well, I could cancel Charlie. That would be murder. Not very nice. I could cancel myself. That would be suicide. Let's not go there. But at any given moment, I can cancel the driver, the goal that causes my mind to use hostility to produce my brain's picture of Charlie. And what happens when I load a goal that resonates my hostility is I've been hiding my hostility from myself. I'm a nice person. I don't have hostility. Not me. No, not me. But when Charlie violates a goal I hold for him, I can certainly come up with some hostility. Why? Because it's in me. Now I say, Charlie really made me mad. That's a lie. You'll notice behind my head on the board, deny, dissociate, and project. Most people in our culture, when it comes to their hostility or fear-based energies, live in total denial. What does denial look like? Have you ever said this to somebody? You made me mad. You made me sad. You hurt me. You really have. Ever say that to somebody?
My husband. Yeah.
Okay. So I have a question. If they're the one with the problem, am I the one with the pain? Mm-hmm. If I'm the one with the pain, obviously I have a problem. So if I say I'm pained because of what they did, I'm lying to myself. I'm pained because there's pain in me. When I realize that, then I come out of denial. Otherwise, I live, and our whole culture, I mean, take a look at the media, take a look at the politics, take a look at all of it, and it's all about denial. You made me mad, you made me sad, you made me afraid. So our definition of denial in this work is whenever I think or speak as though something outside of me is the cause of what's happening inside of me, I'm in denial.
Okay.
When I go into denial,
hold on, just one question.
Okay.
I understand everything when you say like somebody like my husband, somebody like my friend, somebody like, but what happened when it's somebody that abused me or that I don't know? I mean, I understand that it's the same, but it's kind of like more difficult to see it. Like somebody.
Well, that's because of denial. See, when I say to my mind, he made me mad, here's the bottom line of that. I have mad in here. You know, we've got a test for determining whether or not what you're feeling is yours or not. And the test goes like this. Are you feeling it? If you're feeling it, it's yours. So if I have mad and I say, Charlie made me mad, I'm in denial. In order to believe the lie, in order to be able to generate a reality that says Charlie made me mad, I have to hide the part of me that holds anger. And so I dissociate from my anger. When I dissociate from my anger, denial causes dissociation. When I dissociate from my anger, I literally lock it away in a box inside of me, and I cannot change it or touch it. The box is called the unconscious. In the ancient Aramaic, it was called the heart. You remember Yeshua said, take care of the heart, for out of it are the issues in life. It's that unconscious box inside of ourselves that is the problem. It's not Charlie. But I can actually hallucinate. I can actually build a picture world where I really believe that Charlie is the cause of my problem when I'm in denial and I dissociate from my problem. Once I've dissociated from it, I can never change it. And, you know, that's the essence of my book, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And by the way, you know, people are welcome to go to our website and download it free in Spanish or English or several other languages. But in essence, when I'm in denial, and I hide something from myself, I get to do what I've hidden over and over and over and over again. Anybody who comes along to trigger those brain cells, I'll go back into that state. So in fact, they run my life. And here's what happens. When I go into denial and I dissociate from that energy, in order to dissociate from energetically, I push it down. And I go. And what am I doing when I push it down? I put energy into it. You know, imagine I've got a 3-foot diameter spring that stands 3 feet tall. I put it on the floor over here. And I go over and I push down on it and I lock it. And I push down on it and I lock it. And over a period of years, I push down and lock and push. What happens when I finally let the lock off? That spring's going to go flying. Well, when I live in denial, when I denied that he made me mad, he made me sad. No, I've never, that's got nothing to do with me. It's not, it's all them. Then I'm adding energy to that which I'm dissociating from. Back years ago, I used to speak at a conference called Global Science. And there was a gentleman named Marcel Vogel that brought to the conference a thing called a Delaware camera. And with that camera, Marcel was able to take a picture of the high energy waves that leave the mind when we think a thought. What I push down and don't want to deal with repeatedly, I set up a high energy wave that sends a signal out that through resonance is going to pull somebody in to do that very behavior to me. And when they do that behavior, what will happen is I will then project into my brain's image of them what's going on in my unconscious mind. Literally, I'll take that which I've dissociated from and I'll build a picture of them. And my perception will show me them made up of my dissociated content. So they show up in my mind with my problem attached, and now I've got the evidence to prove that it's their problem. But what I have to realize is I'm the one who's feeling it. And when I've been through something 87 different times with 42 different people, sooner or later I need to recognize I'm the only one that was there every time. This is about me. So how do I forgive? How do I change that? Well, when you look at that, the fact that we're never upset with people unless they're violating goals we hold for them, the goal is the key. And in Aramaic, the word, again, forgive is shabag, and it means to cancel. So when I hold a goal for Charlie to cherish me, and Charlie isn't cherishing me, and I go into a fit of rage, what I now know is that in the file, so to speak, the storage system in my mind on being cherished, I have rage. So when Charlie, I want him to cherish me, and he treats me badly, that goal causes my mind to use that rage, and I make my dissociated rage, and I make my brain's image of Charlie out of that dissociated rage. That's projection. You know, the culture teaches that projection is taking something that's inside of you and putting it outside of you. That's not projection at all. That's externalization. Projection is when I take something that's stored in my brain cell structure and I make pictures out of it. And I believe those pictures are true about somebody else other than me. The realities, the pictures that show up in my mind always tell me more about the content of my mind than the world that I think I'm looking at. So what the essence of forgiveness is in that situation with Charlie is I recognize I had a goal for Charlie to cherish me, so now I'm going to cancel that goal. Now, the ego mind, or what we call the non-being mind, says, wait a minute, that's a perfectly good goal. Why would I cancel that goal? I agree with you. It's a perfectly good goal. We should have the goal to cherish everyone on the planet and for everyone on the planet to cherish us. That's wonderful. Perfectly good goal. You're not going to cancel the goal because there's anything wrong with the goal. It's a wonderful goal. You're going to cancel the goal because every time you load that goal in your mind and somebody doesn't fulfill it, that goal resonates your dissociated hostility or fear and causes you to build painful perceptions about other people. But all of that's an inside job. It's all happening internally. So what happens is, again, the goal is the driver for perception. That little 9-bit world is generated and driven by the goals that I load into my mind. So when I shebag, when I cancel the goal, what happens is that perception collapses. This is the piece I didn't understand for 35 years of working with this work. When I cancel the goal, that perception generated by my mind collapses in on itself. And when it collapses in on itself, it gives me access to that deeper hidden part of my mind. I like to use a visualization of everybody saw the towers go down on 9/11. And you think about that picture, here are these huge towers, and at free fall speed, they're dropping into their own footprint.
Mm-hmm.
When I cancel a goal, my projected perception drops in on its own footprint. It opens a pathway into the hidden part of my mind, into my heart, my unconscious. And now, through that pathway, I can bring that pained unconscious material forward. And I bring it forward, if you look at our worksheet process, our step-by-step forgiveness process, and as you said earlier, you've got the app. People can download the app. Just go to their app store and type in Heartland, Heartland, one word, Aramaic forgiveness. And there's the app with the step-by-step. Here's how you forgive. And so when you cancel the goal, that perception collapses in on itself. And now I can bring that forward. The step before on our worksheet where you cancel the goal, the step before, if you remember, you're stepping into a space where you're really tapping into active present love, really bringing love forward. When I bring the hidden unconscious material forward in the presence of active love, it dissolves. I've been developing this work for almost 50 years, and I can remember going back, and this is probably something like, 27, 28, 29 years ago, and I'd been working with people, and there'd be certain people that I'd see and magnificent healing would occur, and other people where it just didn't happen. What's the difference? What became clear to me was, in order for healing to occur, two things had to happen. Mm-hmm. One, love had to be conscious, active, and present in the space. I or someone else in my space had to be holding to, and I mean an active presence of love, not a word, I love you, like I got some nice feeling for you, but where literally that newborn essence, love, is literally present in the space. And then what the canceling of the goal does is it collapses the perception, gives you access to the underlying material. And when the underlying pained content in the heart, and sometimes that pained content is genetic, it goes back generations. When I bring that forward in the presence of active love, it dissolves. It was like, oh, and as I looked at every case where I saw that monumental healing occur, they were the two things that happened. Love was actually present in the space, and that which was less than love, the pained material, was able to come forward in the presence of love. And when that happens, the pained material dissolves, it dissipates. And that is forgiveness, the removal, the dissipation of that energy. Does that make sense?
Yes. And the restoration of that love, what it means, forgive ourselves.
Well, I would say to someone, please never forgive yourself for anything. Okay. Never forgive anyone for anything. It's a major mistake, because if you pardon yourself or you pardon another and you call that forgiveness, you'll never do the forgiveness work. Now, if I do something nasty, it's appropriate for me to pardon myself. Okay, that was a mistake. I acknowledge it was a mistake. I'm going to clean it up, and I'm going to let myself off the hook for that. That's nice. If I call that forgiveness, though, I won't do the forgiveness work. Once I've pardoned myself, then I want to look at the goal that drove me to that behavior, and I want to cancel that goal, so I get to drop into the root of that behavior and bring it forward in the presence of love. When those two things meet, the pained energetic root begins to dissolve in the presence of love. And that's when we're freed of it. That's when the forgiveness actually happens. So it's not about forgiving myself. Again, I might pardon myself, but then I look at, well, when Charlie wasn't very nice to me, what I really wanted was, I wanted to go ahead and be loving with him anyway. And I just bit his head off. I just went, rah, to him. So what am I going to do with that? I'm going to look at the fact that I had a goal for myself. And my goal was to be decent and loving with Charlie. What would forgiveness look like in me doing that? It would look like me canceling my goal to be decent and loving with Charlie. When I do that, I collapse the picture of myself and self-judgment about how nasty I was to Charlie. I collapse that. I get to access the part of my mind that stores nastiness. And I get to bring it forward in the presence of love. And it dissolves. That's forgiveness.
So it's pretty much, I mean, it's pretty much restoring or remembering of, or returning to that love, that essence, pretty much.
Well, it's a dual process. It's the dissolution of the unconscious energy in the heart or in the unconscious. It's the dissolution of that energy of hostility or fear, pain of any kind. Mm-hmm. It's the exposure of that to the presence of love. And again, what is love? Hold the newborn. Go back to that moment, holding the newborn.
Yes.
If I don't have that active presence of love in me, I don't have a human life. You know, just because somebody has what looks like a human body doesn't mean that they're human at all. Unless that essence of love is active in them, there is no human life in that form. And the work is, you know, in step 4 in the worksheet, as you know, is about tapping back in and keying into that essence of love. You know, there's a story that I tell in the worksheet there about the rose and the butterfly, and it's a good metaphor. Imagine we've got a rose and a butterfly. We give them each an ego. They meet, they fall in love. They have a wonderful time together. But one day, the butterfly up and flies away. The rose, knowing that the love of the butterfly is the most important thing in its life, uproots itself to give chase. What's going to happen to the rose? It's going to die. Why does it die? Because it made something more important than staying connected to its root, to its source.
Okay.
My source, again, this list on the board over here, the essence of life is love. When I make anything more important than staying connected to active, present love, I've uprooted myself from my source. Uprooted from my source, I will create all kinds of pain and drama and trauma and craziness around me. And if I come from a family bloodline that did all the drama and trauma and craziness, it's just natural and it feels right to do that. And it looks like a lot of work to stop that, look at the goal I'm using and cancel the goal and go in and feel the root of that. It looks like that's a hard thing to do. You know, a lot of people who get into the forgiveness process and they start looking at their own unconscious dynamics, it's like, that's too hard. I don't want to do that. And what I offer to them is actually living life out of repeated trauma is hard. But if it's a genetic habit, then it's automatic. It takes no effort. It's effortless to do rage and fear and grief and hatred and vengeance if that's what our bloodline and our culture is doing. It isn't hard to forgive, but it takes commitment and effort to say, I've lost my essence. I want to step back to it. I'm going to face this in me and I'm going to throw it out. It takes effort.
It's a process. It's a skill that you learn.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I hear one of they use playing like, you know, a baseball player or a pitcher. And at the beginning, they will not. But then they will, you know, with practice, you will learn and I guess that you will become part of that, or you will.
You know, everybody wants to be a master. They hear about forgiveness, go, wow, that's exciting. I want to become a master at it. But not many people want to look into their pained minds and clean it up. And I use an example of, you know, I mean, Tiger Woods is, I guess, kind of passé these days, but you know where Tiger Woods is right now at the minute of this interview? If I had his phone number and I called him, I'll bet you dollars to donuts that Tiger Woods is on the golf course. He's chipping, he's driving, he's putting. Today, right now. You say, well, why would he do that? He's a champion already. He's a champion because he does that every day. He's a master because he's on the golf course every day, year in, year out, decade in, decade out, for years.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to become a master of forgiveness, you're going to have to be on the course every day. You have to consistently, persistently apply the tool and develop the skill. And when you realize that it's a skill that was disappeared from the planet thousands of years ago, it doesn't exist in the culture. Again, it's been so displaced that everybody's out there, I'll pardon you, I'll pardon you, I'll let you off the hook, I'll forgive you, I'll pardon you. And there's no forgiveness in that. And so when you start shifting around and you actually say, I'm going to take responsibility for what's going on in here, you're changing a massive, massive database. I refer to this body-mind unit as a multi-generational database. It's interesting, in the Aramaic language, the word sin is an archery term. When you fired at the target and you missed the bullseye, the scorekeeper yelled sin, you're off the mark. It was originally meant to be positive feedback, as in, take another shot. That's what sin means.
That's cool.
So when you recognize that it's sin, that's an energy that's off the mark, then you realize that when they talked about sin in this human realm, they were talking about, we're back to energy system theory, they were talking about putting energies into this system that were off the mark. When we put an energy into the system that's off the mark, the system says, ouch, that doesn't belong here. Literally, when we think a thought, it's interesting, the opening words in the book of John in Greek tell us that it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh. Not what it says in Aramaic. In Aramaic, what it says is, in the beginning was the mind energy, and the mind energy became flesh. Now, here's what the cell biologists are teaching us today out of the laboratory. When I think a thought, there's a molecule formed in my structure. It's called a neuropeptide. The neuropeptide circulates around in my structure till it finds a cell with a receptor site that matches. That neuropeptide, literally that thought that's turned into a cell, lands on the receptor site on the cell, and it inserts itself in the cell and is the chemistry of the cell. So if that neuropeptide is off the mark, if it's sin, if it's an energy that doesn't belong in the structure, if our original nature, again, go back and hold the newborn, if our original nature is love, then anything less than love is sin. It's off the mark. Hate, fear, rage, guilt are destroyers of our physiology. How do they destroy it? When I put a sin, when I put an energy, hate or fear, a thought, mind energy that doesn't belong in the structure, into my structure, and it lands on the cell. If you look inside the cell, you'll see that it's chemistry, what we call chemistry in the cell. And now the cell begins to deteriorate. And now we hear in the scriptures where they talk about the wages of sin is death, that wasn't some kind of threat, God's going to get you for your sins. They were just saying, again, Yeshua was about physiology. They're saying, here's how physiology works. You put an energy in that doesn't belong, you begin the deterioration of the cell. You get enough cells deteriorating, you deteriorate an organ. You get enough organs deteriorating, and you die. The wages of sin is death. It was physiology. It's just how it works. And so what I want to do is, in a consistent, persistent way, daily do the work of going into the parts of me, and I might uncover things that are 10, 20, 30 generations old. And when I bring forward those things, I get to clean them up. Back a couple of years ago, we had a woman come to an intensive, and she started really doing this work sincerely. And over a period of a couple of years, she really worked on developing the skills. And it is a skill set. You don't do it perfectly the first time out of the gate. It's a skill that you become. Ultimately, what forgiveness is it's developing the skill to be able to go into literally our own cellular structure, right down to and including our genes, pull out what doesn't belong, be able to decode that energy and throw it away. So she really dug in and was doing her work. And she called a radio show one day, and she shared that she'd been doing a wake-up sheet, the forgiveness process that we developed, on poverty and not having enough money. And as she went in and canceled the goal, she all of a sudden had this flashback, and she found herself laying on the ground, injured, and raising her head and looking over to one side and seeing her injured horse. And she went through dying in that memory. Well, turns out they had records in the family, and her great-great-grandfather, if I remember correctly, this is a few years ago now, her great-great-grandfather had been a livery driver, and there was an accident, and he was injured, and his horse was injured as well. And he died as a result of that accident. She went back and actually felt the feelings of helplessness at not being able to rescue her horse and dying. And then she shifted from that memory to that man's son, who was about 5 years of age. And because he died, there was not enough money in the family to keep him at home, and he was sent to an orphanage. Remember, her worksheet was on poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And she went back and had this genetic memory of a great-great-grandfather and a grandson, which would have been her great-grandfather, suffering through poverty. And as she was able to go in and access that, pull that forward and process through it, a whole new layer of abundance came to her life.
So you're saying that by doing the worksheets that you develop over and over and over, you can even remember by doing it? Yeah?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Good.
I mean, I've had many genetic memories like that come forward, yes.
So
I mean, literally, our genes, this body-mind unit is a storage system. And, you know, if we took every huge supercomputer in the world and linked them all together, we wouldn't have the storage power of one human form. We literally have structured in us. You know, when they said the sins of the father, they were saying the mind energy of generations and generations and generations are stored within that structure. And that becomes the source. That data becomes the source of what builds our perception. And if that data is based in hostility or fear, then we perceive everything through hostility or fear. We're designed to perceive everything through love, through our original nature. So what am I doing as I forgive? I'm making room. When I remove, let's say, a dynamic like that one, when I access that and let it go, I'm making space for love to incarnate. I'm making space for love to come into my physiology so that I function more and more as a true human being.
I'm going to ask you like a personal question for you. So
Okay.
You've been studying this for many, many, many years. I'm not going to say
Almost
age.
50.
I'm not going to say the age of
Yep.
anybody. But how Michael Ryce today, because you understand that already, how Michael Ryce today practice or what he does every day in order to forgive, to live. I mean,
let me say, first of all, I've been doing this full time for 50 years. I'm not finished yet. I'm really clear. I still do my work daily. And what I've found is that as I develop the skill on deeper and deeper levels, and when you realize what it is we're doing, you know, I've had people say, well, God, Michael, you're not finished yet. You must be a slow learner. Why would I do this? Well, if you look at that scriptural thing where it says, the sins of the father would pass ye into 3 and 4 generations. Did anybody ever tell you that there were 4 generations of thought, reality, perception in your genes? And 4 generations, if you count that up, that's 30 lives plus yourselves, 31. You literally have in your structure every thought, every feeling, every perception, every construct of every person in the previous 4 generations of your life. And oftentimes those things are resonated into activity and take over our behavior, and we find ourselves doing things. I go, I don't even want to do that. Why do I do that? And somebody says, oh, that's exactly what your dad used to do. Oh, your grandfather looked just like that when he got mad. Why? It's all stored within our genes. Now, you recognize 4 generations. Where did the 4th generation back get their thoughts, their feelings, their perception? But from the previous 4. Who got them from the previous 4? Who got them from? Who got them from? If you go back 30 generations, count them, 30 generations, there are over 15 billion people in your bloodline. Literally, the thoughts, the feelings are stored in this genetic structure. This is not a wimp's work. You know, it's interesting. There's a passage in the scriptures where they're talking to Yeshua, and they say to him, you know, kind of like, what do we do? What do we have to do to please God? And he gives them an answer. And then in response to the answer, half of the disciples say, too hard a saying, and they leave, and they never come back. Now, what did he say for them to do? Well, he used an Aramaic idiom. And you can't translate an idiom, you've got to know what it means.
Mm-hmm.
So what he said to them is, you've got to eat my body and drink my blood. And they said, what do we need to do to please God? So you've got to eat my body and drink my blood. Now, the Greeks translate that as communion. But why would that be too hard to say? What would that have to do with anything? Well, that's pretty easy to do, isn't it? And isn't that supposed to resolve all your sins? Well, if you go back to the Aramaic, eat my body and drink my blood is an idiom. And it's an idiom that means you're going to have to know everything that I know about the topic and live the way I live in order to do that. So I use an example, and the Aramaic language is still a live language today. I use an example of, let's imagine that I make the finest cabinets in the world. I'm a cabinet maker supreme. I mean, people look at it and go, wow. And let's say that one day you say to me, Michael, I want to learn to make cabinets like you. If I were Aramaic, I would say to you, then you've got to eat my body and drink my blood. It would have nothing to do with wine and wafers and communion. Mm-hmm. It would mean you are going to have to integrate and know everything I know about wood and coloring wood and finishes and doweling and all the things it takes to build a cabinet. Yeshua was saying, you're going to have to undo, and half of his audience left. And, you know, it's like the half that left are like, wait a minute, no, I don't want to have to live his love. I got a good deal going. You know, I got a neighbor down the road. I get to rip him off. He hasn't figured it out yet. I get to rip him off every week, and it adds to my abundance. You're telling me I've got to give that up and become an honest person? Too hard to say. I'm out of here. What? You're telling me? I mean, I got a good thing going with the neighbor's wife. He goes away and, you know, we play a little footsie, and it's a pretty good deal. You're saying I've got to stop that and I've got to come into integrity as a human being? Too hard to say. I'm out of here. And those people went off and made an easy theology. Oh, you just say magic words about a magic man and he'll take care of it. He didn't say that. He gave them hard sayings. He gave them assignments. He gave them work to do. And you'll notice when miracles happened, you know, everybody wants to call him the miracle worker, but you'll notice when the miracles happened, he turned it over to them and said, it was your faith that made you whole. It was that you were ready to do the work that needed to be done.
So I think that this is a beautiful place to finish, because I think that it's perfect to tell people here that the work is on them and they have to keep doing it.
And we're here to support them.
Yes.
You know, 5 days a week, anybody is welcome to call our radio show and ask questions. An hour a day from 1 till 2 o'clock Eastern time. If people call our radio show 563-999-3581, they'll be having a personal conversation with me, and I'm there. And we've got over 10 years of archives. We've got thousands of radio shows that are all about this same conversation. They're there free. We're here to support people. They can go to their app store on their phone, download the app, and absolutely the whole idea is dig in and do your work. And there's a poem that I'd like to close with, if that works.
Absolutely.
The poem is entitled, Will You Make the Difference? Tell me the weight of a snowflake, a hawk asked a wild dove. Nothing more than nothing was the answer. In that case, the hawk said, I must tell you a marvelous story. I sat on a fir tree, and it began to snow. Not heavily, not a raging blizzard, just like in a dream without any violence. I counted the snowflakes settling on the twigs and needles of my branch. And when their number reached 4,732,012, the branch broke off. Having said that, the hawk flew away. The dove, an expert on peace since the beginning, thought about the story for a while and finally said, perhaps only one person's voice is missing for peace to come about in the world. Will you do your work will that be your voice?